I'd like to think that we've all been in the situation where, as a little kid, you've exercised imagination to come up with interesting ideas based on books or shows you've watched. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to start out one's journey into the realm of writing by creating fanfiction. G'day mates and fellow adventurers, my name is Mordecai. I find that when it comes to fanfiction, it easily falls into one of two broad categories, each on opposite sides of the creek. The first is where the fiction really considers and respects the source material to the point where it feels like a natural extension. The other category is the bad fanfiction, the ones where they really are so terrible that they would actively detract from the original stories if they were to be considered canon.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
No, please go away, sequel trilogy. Unfortunately, a lot of fan-made narratives run the risk of falling into this latter category, often by accident, which I want to emphasize is okay to start out with. After all, no one is going to become an amazing writer overnight, and those mistakes can be ironed out with some hard yakka. Much like with learning how to cook a fantastic meal, getting good at writing is going to require time, practice, and feedback from others. Another aspect I find really fascinating is that the really bad fanfiction can often make readers appreciate the original stories, especially if the fan includes a Mary Sue as part of their narrative. Here's a wee fun fact about the origin of the phrase Mary Sue. The term itself originates from a Lieutenant Mary Sue, written up in a Star Trek fanfiction called A Trekkie's Tale, written by Paula Smith in 1974. The original character was actually something of a parody of the self-inserts that had been appearing in the masses in Star Trek fan magazines at the time. And most of these self-inserts that were being parodied were oversaturated to the point of nauseating when they were cooked on a barbecue. And, unfortunately, this flavour also extends to the Mary Sue conjured up by this story's fanfiction writer who wants to solo a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Let us embark into the walkabout territories known as r/RPGHorrorStories. The story we're recounting the tale of today is titled Awful Wannabe Writer Makes Mary Sue Edgelord Character, then refuses to even play due to his own ego, and is written by Reddit user Routine Champion 152. Before I begin this story, I have a confession to make. Personally, I've always found edgy D&D characters, and the people who play them, to be rather fascinating. Mainly because I find it hilarious when people try to make these super cool lone wolf badasses, only for it to backfire on them in hilarious fashion when they don't get their way and no one can take them seriously, causing them to throw a temper tantrum. However, despite playing D&D for over 12 years, and reading many RPG horror stories about them, I've never encountered a character like this in the wild. A friend of mine once played a pretty edgy character, an outcast drow wild magic sorcerer, who got his magic due to being half demon. But he actually turned out really well, and was loved by myself and all my other players, mainly because he kept his edge at just the right level and had more character than just hating everything. However, a few months ago, it happened. Dear readers, allow me to introduce you to Damien Valdegar, Order of the Mutant Blood Hunter, multiclassed with a fiend-packed warlock. No, you did not misread that. This is real, and well, do I really need to say more? Yeah, nah mate, I'm obviously joking. You can absolutely have Blood Hunter and Warlock characters who aren't edgelords. Same as any other class really. It all depends on the execution. And I've personally seen characters with those exact subclasses both done brilliantly. But Damien and his player were just something else. Plus, I think he's indicative of a much deeper problem with the people who bring characters like this to the table. Brace yourself, reader. This is gonna be bad, but in the best way possible. So, someone I knew, a guy I wasn't quite friends with but had known for about 4 years, mentioned to me that he was interested in getting into D&D. I offered to show him the ropes a bit, and after we set up a time to discuss things, I mentioned one of the things we'd be discussing was character creation. To my surprise, he said he already had a character and asked me if I could look at what he'd made and give him my thoughts. I agreed, but I have another confession. There was something of an ulterior motive to my actions here. You see, I'd known this guy in various writing circles, fanfiction specifically, and knew that he had a really bad habit of making Mary Sue characters who were basically self-inserts for whatever fandom he was writing about, including but not limited to Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and Harry Potter. And in said stories, he would rewrite and undo entire elements of the canon, either to make his OC the center of the universe, or simply because he didn't like them. Usually, it was for both of these reasons. For example, Game of Thrones fans, you know the Tyrion-Tywin dynamic? That iconic rivalry that was so interesting and compelling, especially in the books, that gave you insight into the mindset of two people that was rooted in how their upbringings shaped who they were, leading to so many great moments and a compelling payoff? Yeah, that was completely scrapped in his fanfic, because Tyrion and Tywin were buddy-buddy for no established reason, and there was no dislike between them at all, with Tywin even accepting Tyrion as his heir. Yeah, eat your heart out, Season 8. Also, his Star Wars OC takes Anakin's place as Palpatine's protege, then overthrows him and goes on to rebuild the Sith Empire. So, given this guy's track record, although to his credit he had been showing some small improvements over the years I knew him, I decided to have a look at what he had made. And without wanting to sound too authoritarian, I was planning to see what he had come up with, and if it would work fine in an actual D&D campaign. And if I felt it wouldn't, I was hoping to iron out the bumps with some constructive feedback. And so, over a Discord chat, he introduced me to Damien. And it wasn't long before I knew I had my work cut out for me. Damien was a wood elf with a soldier background, and his backstory was that he was a rough and tough orphan living on the streets of the capital city of an elven kingdom. So badass that he apparently killed a fully grown man in a fight when he himself was only 9 years old. He was found and taken in by a special forces unit, consisting of mutagen-using super soldiers within the kingdom's army, and was trained to be one of them. And of course, he not only survived the ridiculously grueling training methods, but proved to be the best of the best, even becoming an officer and solo killing multiple dangerous monsters like trolls, illithids, beholders, and demons. Also, he gained a great deal of fame and became something of a local hero due to his first and most famous kill, 1v1ing a massive hydra, then skinning the beast to wear its hide as a cloak. And all of this before even starting the campaign. Then, as Damien grew into adulthood, the king himself took an interest in him, inviting him into the palace to speak with him. Turns out, this guy was actually Damien's uncle, who had usurped the throne by murdering the previous king and queen, Damien's parents, and tried to dispose of the prince but failed. He then tried to finish what he started by sicking his personal guard on Damien, barely succeeding in bringing him down, after a fight scene where Damien killed all of the guardsmen save 2, who'd be mini-bosses in his personal storyline later on, and disposing of the Bloodhunter's body in a river. Damien didn't stay dead for long though. As his soul lingered on the edge of the afterlife, he was approached by Bel, an outcast archdevil and the former ruler of Avernus. He had taken something of an interest in Damien for his combat prowess, and had apparently sympathized with him, having also been usurped, as Bel had also suffered that humiliation. And so, he proposed a deal. Power and the chance for Damien to take back his birthright, in exchange for allowing Bel to possess his body. Damien agreed, and so rose from the grave, suffused with the Archdevil's power, and is now out to regain his throne and to get revenge against his uncle. This also changed him physically, apparently giving him sharpened teeth and eyes that, and I quote, have lizard pupils that burn like hellfire. So to summarize, we basically have a stew made from mixing the Witcher's Geralt of Rivia, a mutant monster slayer super soldier, Shadow of Mordor's Talion, dead warrior coming back to life due to being possessed by a magical being, Warhammer Fantasy's Malice Darkblade, Elf and the demonic nature of his patron, and the Lion King Simba, an exiled prince reclaiming his kingdom from his uncle. Mixed together, served with a side of self-insert, and horrifically overseasoned with wannabe badass. Yeah, sorry mates, I hate to break it to you now, but you aren't leaving this video without some form of appetite. Now, just to be clear, I'm not gonna go after the guy for taking inspiration from other characters. After all, let's not beat around the bush. We all know this is something of a core part of D&D, taking inspiration from other sources and media. Plus, I'm not sure he was even aware of Malice Darkblade's existence. Also, credit where it's due for him, he had done at least some research, and actually chose what I thought was a mildly interesting patron. As far as I'm aware in the Forgotten Realms, Bel isn't actually cast out of the Nine Hells, but an archdevil who might be doing this as part of a plan to gain his throne back, playing and manipulating Demian to seek power, and pretending to sympathize with him after having also been deposed of his own position. Tons of potential there for an interesting warlock-patron dynamic. Assuming you did it right. However, I say this now because they're the only thing I'm gonna cut him some slack on, because here's where the problems get worse. Side note by the way, Damian was described as having silver hair, and following his resurrection, red eyes. So I have to ask, what is it with edgelord characters and the albino look? I've noticed this quite a few times where an edgy character is also an albino. Like, is there some sort of connection there that I'm not aware of? I'm aware of Elric of Melnirbone, the OG fantasy albino, but I'm fairly sure most of these guys making edgy characters probably aren't. But I digress. When I heard this character concept, there were concerns I felt I had to raise after he finished his initial pitch. To be clear, I phrased these as suggestions and accompanied each one with suggested alternatives. I wasn't just saying, your character sucks, and listing all the reasons why. But here goes. Firstly, I explained that Demian being so powerful before the story even started wouldn't be likely to fly in an actual game, since the idea that he was already a powerful badass killing machine didn't leave the character with anywhere to go during the actual campaign itself. The experience of becoming more powerful alongside your party is something I think is integral to D&D, especially for forming bonds between characters and players both, due to that feeling of accomplishing something together. So I made the suggestion that Demian maybe be more of a mid-rank blood hunter in his unit as a means of getting around this. This was related to the second concern I raised. There wasn't a clear explanation as to how Demian managed to avoid his uncle's coup. Was he smuggled out of the palace by loyalists as a baby? And if they did that, why would they apparently abandon their prince to live as a feral child? They could have raised him themselves, or at the very least left him in an orphanage. The guy then said that he escaped himself, to which I replied that surely if this happened when he was old enough to escape, surely he'd remember something about his mum and dad as well. He apparently doesn't, so how does that work? One thing I also wanted to ask about, but never got the chance to, was how Demian can apparently 1v1 beholders and demons, but not a group of guards. The math isn't adding up, Chief. But that never came about, because while I was suggesting ways to get around these concerns, I could tell the guy was getting frustrated. Even as I said something to the effect of, you might want to sort these out to make things easier for your DM to work the story into a campaign, and I frankly started to get the impression that he didn't like or couldn't take criticism. And his defensive response was legitimately to just start listing off things his character had done in his backstory, not even seeming to pay attention to what I was saying, almost like he was in something of a trance. Some of the things I remember include: 1. Demian having a pet red dragon that he raised since it was an egg and uses as his personal mount. Not a drake, an actual full-on dragon. 2. Him fighting in an outright invasion of his homeland by an orc army, and turning the tide of a battle single-handedly by descending from on high on his dragon and cutting down the orc chieftain and all of his bodyguards. 3. Love interests. Apparently, Demian had a hot girlfriend, and he literally described it as being like Batman and Catwoman's relationship, right down to his girlfriend being a career thief who uses a whip as her main weapon. He also said something about Demian rescuing a nobleman's beautiful daughter from a drow enclave that was raiding the kingdom's lands, wiping out the Dark Elves to the last man. He then brought the daughter back home, and they also began a romance. So here's a harem, and something of a love triangle. So let's take a break from the story to go culinary and I'll talk about character design to try and understand why this character is more than oversaturated. A really good model for designing or creating a character is to opt for a small ice cream sandwich. I know how strange that sounds, mates, but let me cook with this for a while. When you have a 3-course dinner at a restaurant, you have an entree, a main course, and a dessert, each of which complement each other to produce a great experience that you retrospectively tell friends about so they check out the establishment. Equating this to a Dungeons & Dragons game, you can think that the entree is the setting, the main course is the campaign, and the dessert is the small ice cream sandwiches for each character in the party. A lot of what Demian is trying to achieve here is like having honey, maple syrup, sprinkles, chocolate chip waffles, peppermint ice cream, and bacon on top of a packed ice cream sandwich. That's way too much saturated flavour being added onto a single character. That's meant to be in a party of other characters. Now, to be fair, this is the dude's first TTRPG character, and his prior experience is writing up a copious number of Mary Sue characters whose presence drastically changes the universe they're supposed to be written for into comparative nonsense. Wait, what am I saying? The guy has had years to listen to feedback and correct this bad fanfiction writing trap. This particular ice cream sandwich he has prepared has too many elements going on, and on top of conflicting with each other, they also conflict with everything else. Remember, small ice cream sandwich as the dessert to a 3-course meal. Often the tricky part is to allow the ice cream sandwich to develop flavour as the campaign progresses. Mates, having all of this character development happen before the first session has even been had, to me, is allowing the dessert to just melt onto the plate and calling it a day. I'll expand on this further in my afterthoughts, so back to the narration we go. All of this was obviously setting off a deafening level of Mary Sue alarms in my head, and while over the course of this conversation, I was really starting to wonder what I could do with this. I decided not to give up. So instead of running the risk of making it feel like I was just poking holes into his idea, although I don't think that was what I was doing, I decided to change tracks and ask him where he was planning for his character's personal storyline to go. This got him excited again, and he went into a long and detailed description of how Demian would return to overthrow his uncle and reclaim his kingdom, including some very detailed descriptions about how his character would besiege the city with an army, fight his way to the castle single-handedly to find his uncle cowering on the throne, and after fighting and disarming him, he'd drive his uncle's sword into his uncle's heart and send his soul to the 9 hells. Then, after becoming the rightful king and taking his girlfriend as his queen, I have no idea which one of the two he meant by this, by the way, he had an even higher goal in mind. Although his explanation wasn't so clear for how this would happen, he was planning for Demian and Belle to return to the 9 hells, reclaim Avernus from Zariel, and then go on to overthrow Asmodeus and make themselves the new ruler of the Hells. Now, I'm not exactly a Forgotten Realms lore expert, so I'm not gonna say anything on whether that would even be possible, but as over the top as it was certainly a fun idea, and I said as much, telling him, okay, that's actually kinda cool. I'm sure if it fit the campaign you and your party were in, your DM could work that in. His response was, what do you mean? To which, over a bit of back and forth, I explained that usually in D&D, the DM will have the story of the campaign they're telling, and will work in player backstories as they go where appropriate. Or at least, that's how I do it in my games. Upon hearing this, the guy started to lose it. First in a confused, panicking sense, as he tried to puzzle out that Damien wouldn't be at the center of the campaign, and then he seemed to get increasingly angry when I mentioned that other players would be tagging along, that he might have to play through their characters' backstories as well, and how things might not go exactly as he wanted. For context, I ended up saying something to the effect of, sometimes in D&D, things don't go to plan. I've had a couple of situations where I've been like, hell yeah, this is gonna be awesome, and then the dice don't pan out. But that's just part of the game. This didn't help though. He started raising his voice, saying that he was worried that other players and characters would ruin his story, and that the dice might screw up what he had in mind. I tried to calm him down by saying that the other players' characters in D&D are usually invested in helping out the rest of their party, unless one of them is a real jerklord, and that the different strengths of a varied party usually help make things easier and make a party better at progressing the story. After all, I said, no character can be the best at everything. And that was when the nonsense hit the fan. The dude outright yelled at me, accusing me of calling his character a Mary Sue, and ranting about how everyone he asked to look at his character ruins his ideas by wanting to change them. One bit I remember him saying after he accused me of saying Damien was a Mary Sue was, "If I hear those words again, I'm going to explode." Mate, you said those words, not me. But in all seriousness, if I wasn't trying to be constructive in my critique of Damien, I would consider him such. We have a character who is extremely overpowered for the situation he is in, wants to be the complete center of the entire narrative, played by somebody who clearly sees this character as an extension of themselves. Not just having a couple of traits from their player to make them more relatable to others, or to help the player get into their character's head, which I think is absolutely fine, especially if you're playing a roleplay heavy campaign, but a character literally seen as an idealized version of themselves. No more and no less. There's an important difference. Anyway, after a long and uncoordinated rant about D&D now sounding stupid and wanting to find a different place he could use Damien, he left the call. So yeah, that happened. In truth, I'm glad that this guy didn't end up joining my group, if what he was expecting was for us to rewrite the entire campaign and party to focus solely on him. And without a doubt, Damien is one of the worst characters I've ever personally come across. I have seen a few dark characters work in D&D before, my Drow Sorcerer friend and a few others included. But having heard of plenty of edgy badasses like this one over the years in other people's horror stories, and now having seen one for myself in the wild, it just confirms a suspicion I've held for many years. These people and others like them don't want to play D&D, a cooperative role-playing game. They want to play XX Cold Steel Lone Wolf XX's personal power fantasy. They want to be destroying every obstacle, left, right, and center, without ever being challenged or expected to grow. They want to be seen as playing a deep and complex character, despite not even coming close to meeting the requirements for either of those. And above all else, I don't think they even want to play a game. I think they just want to be the main character in their own story, where all the other players either don't exist at all, or are just a captive audience to behold how awesome they are. Or rather, how awesome they think they are. That's one of the things that stuck out to me as a big difference between my friends who have played dark characters and people like this guy here. Should I have stuck it out for longer or just never bothered in the first place? I don't know. Was I foolish to expect more from this guy given I knew what his writing was like? Most likely yes. I guess I just try not to think that anyone is beyond improvement, so that's on me. Also, without wishing to turn this into a Am I the Jerk post, part of me wonders if I might have crushed this guy's desire to play. I just didn't want to set him up for failure by making him think that D&D was going to be this solo game where the plot would revolve entirely around this one character, even if that was what he wanted. I think what frustrated me the most about Demian's player was that outside all the obvious edge and wannabe badass energy he was attempting to put out, I could see a faint glimmer of potential. A character being manipulated by Bel to seek greater power, so he could claim revenge and eventually pave the Archdevil's way to reclaiming Avernus. Could be a really cool personal storyline, provided it fit the campaign. But that was the problem. If it fit the campaign. Whether this guy had done lore research on D&D and that's what got him into it without realizing how the game itself works, or if he did know and was just willfully ignorant of the matter, I do not know. But he clearly expected to be only part of a story tailored to his character and nobody else's. And I know at this point we're all gonna say, mate, why are you even playing D&D? Just write a book. But the scary thing, reader, is that he'll probably try. In summary, cringy guy with a background in bad writing makes a really edgy and overpowered D&D character, asks me for feedback, gets annoyed when I suggest some changes might need to be made, then throws a tantrum and refuses to play when he realizes that the entire game won't revolve around his fun and his character. And that's how the tale concludes. Let's get culinary for a wee bit with a throwback to what I mentioned earlier with the ice cream sandwich analogy for designing a character. The thing is, ice cream sandwiches can be as flavorful as you want, but can be tricky to balance if you have too many elements happening at once. The aspect that really buggers up the character is that a lot of the plot ideas could work if they were allowed to develop over the course of a campaign. Raising a normally evil dragon to be good, subverting the usurper to a throne of a kingdom, being resurrected by a devil for a long-term scheme, heck, even developing an in-game romantic interest. Assuming that's something that's allowed at the table, which it may not be. However, because Demian over here wants his dragon-riding warlock bloodhunter hybrid to have all of this power immediately at his fingertips, without spending any in-game time earning it, the character is effectively being stunted from the get-go. Plus, he wants his character to always succeed. To which I say, why? Not allowing for the possibility of a character failing is a trap that is far more insidious in nature. The only development being allowed to occur for this character is their own ego as he desires to take on the forces of the Nine Hells as a conqueror. In other words, the only direction the character goes is downhill. Quite literally. When all of this is put together, you then have a hodgepodge parody of a dessert that actively conflicts with the rest of the three-course dinner, and not just because its flavour throws all of the other flavours out of balance. If I had any advice for Demian, it would be along these lines. Tone down the enthusiasm for making this kind of specifically overextensive character backstory, and try to rein it down to some more focused, albeit more broadly applicable, central ideas. Instead of having this complicated and lengthy backstory for the character tailor-made for a specific setting which may not be played in, have some of the more ambitious stuff, like raising a dragon, be something that the character works towards over the course of the campaign, like a pre-planned goal. That way, you can have your character grow into the role of the dragon-riding blood hunter warlock, and learn how to wield that power rather than just having it. Somehow, I doubt that Demian would ever be happy with having a character actually develop over time, but as long as he learned how to listen to feedback, he and others like him have the potential to be really fantastic players. And that, I feel, is the real horror story for them. Thanks mates for watching the video. If you like my content and want to see more or wish to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and maybe leave the video a like. It's free to do and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Again, thanks for watching mates, and I shall see you all next time.